everyone. So welcome to KCHR webinar. Today we have NP Chekutti. So he's a senior journalist and an author who has written on Kerala's history and society. So among his books are 3 volumes of Christian memorials in South India, tracing European families through cemetery records in Malabar and Nilgiri Hills. So those who haven't read the abstract, I'll read out a bit. So it was in March 1807 that King George III of Great Britain signed into law the Act of the Abolition of the Slave Trade in the British Empire. Its Indian territories were ruled by the East India Company, who were obliged to follow the king's orders. But the situation in the farthest parts of the empire was quite different, and slavery was practiced in the guise of agrarian practices as discovered by Thomas Hervey Baber, who was posted as an official of the company in the late 1790s. So he married Helen Farron, an 18-year-old widow at Tellicherry in 1798, where his first child was born in 1802. So Baber, as the magistrate of Tellicherry, was involved in a legal action against Murdoch Brown, who came to Malabar as a young man and set up an estate at Anjarakandi. So he was close to company officials in Bombay and elsewhere and used slaves transported from southern princely states as labor in his state. So Baber raided his estate, found several slaves kept there, and launched legal proceedings against him. The history of these proceedings, which span decades, offers us insight into the duplicity of the colonial administration. So they paid lip service to the policy of ban on slavery on the one hand, and went about encouraging such practices under their administration on the other. Baber's personal experiences, as well as the extensive evidence in colonial records, reveal this dual practice. So we have today KCHR Director, Professor Dineshan V, and our chairperson, Professor Ganesh, couldn't join today. So he'll be joining after an hour. He's in an emergency meeting with the minister. So today's topic is Slavery in Malabar, a look at the life and career of Thomas Hervey Baber by NP Chekutti. So I welcome you, sir, on behalf of KCHR.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So over to Director. Would you like to say something?
Thank you very much, Pooja, and thanks a lot, Mr. NP Chekutti, for accepting our invitation and agreeing to deliver a lecture titled Slavery in Malabar, a look at the life and career of Thomas H. Baber. We know that there is not much work on slavery in Malabar except the general statement here and there. Of course, there are mentions about slavery in a few works as well as in documents. And I'm sure that NP Chekutti's presentation will be an eye-opener for us. And I don't want to stand between Chekutti and our listeners. I request NP Chekutti to deliver his lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'm extremely happy that KCHR has chosen to discuss this issue of slavery in Malabar, because I think it's a matter not only of historical interest, but there are certain aspects of actual policy making that we need to be aware of and really concerned about when we are discussing about the life of the most downtrodden sections of Kerala society today. These people were called the agrestic slaves in the 19th century. And we have very detailed information from the early 19th century on the life of the agricultural slaves in Kerala, especially Malabar. And now I think that part of it, that whether our society has been actually able to find some solution to the problems of these communities will need to be discussed later on, because I think that in the matter of a tribal population, the Indian society and Indian administration has in the 2004-5 period, through the FRA, they have made some real contributions, making amends for the historical injustices heaped upon the tribal community in the country. Like that, there is a need to look at the real, actual historical experiences of these agricultural slaves in Malabar and other parts of Kerala, who were subjected to very serious historical injustices. But we will discuss that matter later on. But my basic point is this, that in 1811, that is more than 200 years ago, the issue of the practice of slavery came into public attention in Malabar through an action of Thomas Hervey Baber. It was, he has said that it was only an accident, that it was only an accidental incident that led him to realize that there was slavery being practiced in parts of Malabar, when somebody told him that in a plantation near Tellicherry, that is called Anjarakandi, slave labor has been was being utilized. So it was a charge really of some significance, because a few years earlier, the British Crown had actually banned what is called the slave trade. But the question was whether these people who were employed in the plantation were actually brought here as part of the slave trade or not. Anyway, Baber had actually raided these premises at Anjarakandi. He realized that there were a large number of people, especially children, especially from lower sections of our society, who were employed there as slaves. According to the records, he had seen around 74 or 75 people in the plantation owned by Murdoch Brown, and he released, after serious examinations, investigations, around 123 or 24 people from the plantation. They were sent back to their villages. And the question was raised at that time was whether these people do really constitute slaves. According to Hervey Baber's records, he has said that many of them were actually brought here from southern parts of Kerala, in Travancore country. There were a number of evidences that many of these young boys were taken to Tellicherry from a place, some places in Alleppey, by a person called Hassan Ali and his accomplices. And Hassan Ali was essentially a slave trader who kidnapped a large number of these children from Alappuzha and brought them through Chavakad to Malabar, where the company officials had themselves gave support for this kind of transportation. According to the records, they were brought to Chavakad, and from Chavakad they were brought to Tellicherry with support of the local darogas, that is the police officials and revenue officers. So we realized that according to the legal practices at that time, the colony was just set up there in Malabar, and so there was the legal system was very fledgling also. But even then, it was very clear that it was a violation of what is called the colonial practices, because slave trade had been completely banned, not only in the metropolitan countries, but also in the colonial parts of the British Empire. But you know, when we look at the entire records, which spans around 3 decades from 1811 to 1839, that is until the retirement of Baber, what we see is that the case continued and the dispute continued, and actually it took a lot of changes in the course of the 3 decades, especially showing the changes in the policy formulations of the colonial administration. Initially, the colonial administrators were generally very supportive of the arguments made by Baber. They said that this is something a very serious matter, and the exertions or the raid and the actions made by Thomas Baber was very important and things like that. But later on, what we see is that the colonial administration slowly withdrew from their position, and they started accepting that actually the kind of slavery which is being practiced in the agricultural fields can be part of a traditional system. So the point is, what they were earlier, their point was that in the new plantation which started in Tellicherry, this slave trade was totally unacceptable, because Murdoch Brown had filed a case, and the case initially in the court of law, Baber had been vindicated. But later, the records tell us that the colonial administration slowly withdrew. They said, agristic, what is agrarian practices are in earlier practice, in earlier system, were these people, the Denmis or the landlords, they have to employ these agricultural laborers, and this is a system which has been going on for a long time, so we cannot change it. That actually means that the slavery practiced in the agricultural fields, that is a person being attached to a piece of land, then he practices agriculture. He is considered as a property of the landlord. But one important point that has happened in this period, especially after 1811, that we notice in the records, and also Baber basically makes this point, that we have made a very basic innovation. What is the innovation that we have made? We have made it that these people can be bought and sold like cattle. This was something totally unheard of in the history at that time, because there was no such, earlier there was no such massive transaction of landed properties. But now what was happening is that after 1811, in the records, especially in the 1819 records, there is a very clear debate. We can see a debate happening among the British officials on the issue whether we can actually approve of this practice of selling the slaves as a property, a commercial property. And many collectors in the Malabar region, they accepted that, look, our job is to massively collect the arrears. And there are large number of arrears happening here. There is a lot of arrear here, and the colonial, actually the colonial in the practices of collection, the money collection or the revenue collection, it has been described in detail by K.N. Panikkar and many others. It is an inhuman system, really. There was no way that the kind of amount that was being asked to be collected. So they had to act in such a manner that any kind of humanitarian consideration out of the question. So Collector Rohan, he said that no, our job is to collect money, and in order to collect money, we'll have to make use of whatever facilities available to us. That means even selling these people as commercial property is acceptable. And also Baber has pointed out that, look, we are dividing the families. We are dividing the father and mother. We are dividing the children from their father. We are dividing wife from the husband. So actually, this is something that we have brought in as a new kind of a practice. So when we look at the entire, documentation available in the British records, And mentioned in the Law Commissioner's report of 1834, who had made a detailed study of the practices of slavery in Malabar and other places in India. They also accept that there was a substantial case that such practices were going on in various parts of India. Malabar was one area where they made a very detailed study about it. Because other areas, especially Bengal, was another place, but Malabar, we have a very substantial records, basically because Baber had documented it. Baber had also given a very detailed, reply to the questions raised by the law commissioners for their report in 1834, which is a very long document. It's a very long document where he actually describes the entire sequence of developments. And he points out that slavery was a reality in Malabar society at that time. And the British, that is the main point. The British, through their new practices, accepting that the people who are working in the properties, working in the field, they can be considered as a commercial property attached to it. So they can be attached, they can be sold. There was a case somewhere in Baipur where the issue was raised, where the concerned people had gone to the court, and the discussion was based on it, and the administrator said that we cannot actually avoid this kind of practices. So when we look at these debates and the history of these developments, we realize that at least in Malabar, there has been a very serious issue of violation of human rights, violation of normal, human dignity, and even violation of the actual what is called the rules or the acts passed by the British Parliament, because the British colonial administration themselves were bound to actually accept the king's laws. The king had actually specifically banned it, and because of that only, the case continued for many decades. But at the final day, what was happening was that the arguments of the slave owners, argument of a person like Murdoch Brunt, who had actually kept slaves in his property, were given support. Now, the case has been widely known and widely discussed in Kerala in various, forums. And the tragedy of these people are also well known. But what is most important at this point of time is that what really happened to our, agricultural slave community. Because in the early 19th century, in the first 3 decades of early 19th century, the matter was seriously debated. The matter was brought to public attention. The matter was debated even in British Parliament, and the matter was also taken up in American newspapers, as we see a number of newspapers of that period. And also, we see that many reports of that in contemporary journals like Asiatic Journal. It was a journal published in London, which was more or less like a kind of a what is called a weekly directory, a compilation of Asian news. So in all these newspapers, as well as contemporary reports, as well as the parliamentary reports, there is very clear evidence that such a practice had been going on. But what is very significant is that later on, when we started thinking about what is called the land reforms in our country, land reforms in our society, this issue, the issue of the real people who actually who are slaves attached to these properties, their issue were not seriously taken care of in the later administrative reforms. For example, when we look at the 1920s, some legislations in Southern Malabar, and also the legislations and the recommendations of the Kutikisha Menon committee report, set up by the Rajaji government in 1937, we see that this issue was not really seriously discussed at all. The issue discussed was that of what is called Varumbatakar and tenants and that kind of communities. But they were given a lot of attention in public debates also. And the land reforms also that we had later on that we had introduced in Kerala were mainly focused on the issues of what is called the Varumbatakar and that kind of tenant communities. But the issue of slaves who were attached to these properties were not properly addressed. That is the point which needs to be much more seriously debated, because at the end of the day, we have to accept, we'll have to accept that there has been a real injustice, heaped upon this substantial section of our community. In Baber's records, he has mentioned a number of communities who were agricultural slaves in his period. He has mentioned that there were a large number of Cheruma community people, a large number of Pulea community people, and these are the names he has mentioned of the people who are considered. The term he uses is agrestic slaves. But he says that these are the communities who were attached to the landed properties, and they were, the kind of rights they had. It was traditional rights. And as part of the traditional rights, they were never detached from the property. That's the main argument. They were never detached from the properties. They had a right to livelihood. They had a right to be attached to these properties, and they were actually part and parcel of these properties. But when the colonial administration came and they started their own practices, even thus traditional rights were being withheld or being abandoned, and these people were being treated as mere commercial property. That is a very, very significant issue that he has raised in his comments to the law commissioners. And another point that he mentions is that this is a violation. This is a violation of the rules, because in the strictest sense of the word, these people cannot be treated as a commercial property, because they were part of a traditional system. So when we are introducing this new system of treating this as commercial property, we are going back, or we are making a very different kind of treatment. He calls itself an innovation in a derisive manner. It's an innovation by the colonial system, and he says that it's another very important point. He says that I have noticed that with this kind of a treatment, that we have heaped upon these people, we are actually contributing to the traditional systems which are decadent to continue unchallenged. So these feudal traditions, which we are supposed to be breaking as a civilized people, instead of breaking this feudal system, instead of breaking these traditional systems, we are actually contributing to continue these systems in a permanent manner. And he says that I have seen a large number of these social communities from the lower sections of Kerala society. I have seen that there is a very substantial demand or need or urge for change among them, But because of our policies, such possibility of a change, such possibility of a social change is being denied. That is a very important argument, that whenever a society is going through a transformation, going through socio and economic transformation, the government or the administration has a responsibility to support the kind of social changes, to support the kind of social changes in the positive manner. Instead, what we are doing is to actually deny even the semblance of progress or the semblance of possibilities of progress to these communities. Now, what actually happened in his life is very interesting. That when the administration slowly withdrew, administration slowly abandoned him, and he even faced a death threat and all that kind of issue. Murdoch Brown's son, F.C. Brown. F.C. Brown is a very interesting, very colorful character. And actually, F.C. Brown is a very important person of great significance in Malabar history also, because in 1848, he had given another major evidence to the parliamentary committee on cotton cultivation. In that very low 50-60 pages of evidence is there. In that, C. Brown gives a very detailed account of the agricultural practices, the problems of agriculture, and how agriculture is being completely destroyed in Malabar because of the policies. He is very very. He gives a very clear and sharp account of it, that the kind of taxation being imposed on the agriculturists. And he says that, for example, a toddy tapper, who is, having that instrument used to, he had to pay a tax on that instrument, an annual tax on that instrument. And he gives a very detailed, account, as well as a statistical chart of each agricultural implement and the annual tax he has to pay on it. Generally speaking, if you look at it, he gives almost every implement that was in use at that time in Malabar. And he, when we look at it, we see that the taxes were more than the actual amount was, amount you needed to produce it. For example, the toddy tapper's knife. If that knife is costing 2 rupees, the tax was much more than that. So that way, through this excessive taxation, many of the traditional agricultural systems and practices were completely destroyed. And he gives a very sharp and pointed argument based on evidence, because he has been there. He has been, and also his father have been agriculture practitioners for more than half a century in Malabar at that time. On the basis of that field experience, he has provided a very graphic account of how agriculture in Malabar was completely destroyed by the colonial administration. And he also describes how difficult it was to bring products from the eastern belt to the sea coast, and how the kind of colonial practices of keeping tax officers in every place, and being forced to pay taxes in each and every place. That kind of very detailed discussions are there in his 1848 record. But main point, what I have to say is that if we look at the long history of these debates from 1811 to 1839, we are forced to realize that at least in the colonial administration, there was a very serious realization and a critical appreciation also of the kind of policies they were they were trying to implement and the consequences of it. At least there were large number of officers like, Colonel Monroe and Baber and in Madras, Advocate General and Anstruther and many others who in the early period were supportive of this kind of reforms. But over a period of time, we see that the colonial administration becomes rather frozen in its what is called is interest or in its reforming zeal. They abandon it. They go to a very negative mood. They try to detach from the social reality. They try to completely cut off from the social reality. And that was in the 1880s, 1820s, that we see this change, especially that debate on whether we should support slavery or not. That happened in 1819 on an incident at Baipur in Malabar. And majority of the officers were, especially people like Lushington, Mohan, and many others, were supportive of this kind of oppressive system. We should collect money. We should collect revenue at whatever be the cost, at whatever be the consequences. We need not bother about it. That kind of argumentation were becoming much more powerful. And it is at that time we also see that the colonial administrators, many of them, slowly moving to the areas like Ooty, the hill stations, cut off from the local life, local people, local communities. That's also another development that we are seeing at that time, showing that the colonial administration was becoming much more aloof, and their policy was becoming much more hardened as far as the local population is concerned. But that's a phenomenon, I think, that has been happening all over India, because at one point in the history of colonial administration, many of the colonial administrators had felt that we need not have any kind of closer relationship with the local communities. We need not have any interest in their welfare. Our job is to collect money. Our job is to get much more money, and reforms is not in our agenda. That's something that becomes very clear by the middle of 18th century. So I think I can conclude my comments on this issue, pointing out that Baber himself, Baber himself was very what is called disillusioned person by the end of his career. He started as an officer in East India Company in the late 18th century, 1797. He came to Malabar as a writer. And then he became part of he was appointed as a magistrate in Tellicherry. He worked there for a long time. He was involved in these kind of activities. But, then he was transferred out of Malabar. He was in Ratnagiri. He was suspended also from service. Then he fought his suspension in London. He came back to the service again. But, by the end of it, he had completely disillusioned and he had become completely cut off. And in 1839, he actually takes what is called voluntary retirement in a contemporary term from service. And he was later on working as a kind of a consultant or a consul for many of the local kings, like the Travancore king, Cochin king, and many others. So his life, the trajectory of his life. Of course, we are always, remembering Weber as the person who defeated Payashji Raja, and of course, he was a young officer when he confronted, Payashji Raja in the Wayanad forest. He defeated him. He was responsible for the murder of Payashji Raja also, but he took the body to Manandavadi in an honorable manner. That is part of history. But when we look at the career and the life and career of the early colonial administrator called Thomas Hervey Baber, what we are saying is that there was a kind of what is called a sense of commitment, a sense of duty to the people they were in charge of. And they had, because of their long career in these places, they had very long and deep understanding of the social and other developments in these areas also. For example, his notes to the law commissioners, which he had written down as a detailed note to the questionnaire. He mentions a number of practices, a number of places he had visited, and the kind of traditional cultural practices these people of Malabar had, the kind of festivals they were conducting, the kind of marriage ceremonies they were involved in. So all these kinds of very interesting things that he had noticed and he had witnessed, he has mentioned. Also, he has given very detailed description about the system of what is called untouchability in Malabar region. He says that it's kind of a graded system. It's a graded system where the lowest is always at the receiving end. Upper level, there are so many layers, and he mentions a very interesting a case of a Thea person in Calicut. Thiyas are, intermediary caste. And one person, had a very illustrious or kind of industrious mind. He knew how to convert his caste status as an untouchable person into commercial benefits. What the thing is that the person, the people who touch him or who see him, they become polluted, so they'll have to stop their travel and all that. They'll have to go and dip themselves in a tank, something like that. So he would stay in on the road, so that people who are coming without prior warning, they may just meet him and they get polluted. So he asked for money. There is a very interesting. In order to ensure that he will not get into their path, he had to be offered money. That's an example Weber mentions of how this caste practices in a way became a very interesting commercial activity also for those people who are able to make money out of it. So that's a very interesting social situation, social and cultural situation. These are all there, and we need to have a very detailed and very important study into these practices of slavery, because slavery was a reality in Malabar. Slavery was a reality despite the colonial pretensions that we don't practice slavery. Slavery was there. And Mahi, because it was a French colony, and in the French colonies, we know that this kind of slavery has been accepted even after the revolution. C.L.R. James in his Black Jacobins has given a very detailed description of how slavery was being practiced and how the slaves had fought the colonial administration. It's a very important study for our understanding our Malabar history also. C.L.R. James has given as a very important eye opener to the way the system of slavery was being practiced in Malabar, because the French colony of Mahi was converted into a major area where the slave trade actually thrived, with people from Muscat and other people, other areas, conducting it in a global scale, in an international level. So I think it's very important for us at this point of time to ask ourselves whether these great historical experiences, these great historical evidences, which are there scattered in our papers in the 19th century British papers, as well as our own experiences, are we actually taking these into consideration and making policies to set right the historical injustice heaped upon these communities. Why did they become totally landless? Why did they become totally abandoned in our social system? Why majority of our scheduled caste people are still in a social situation where they are unable to sustain themselves? Why do they feel totally abandoned by our society? Why do they feel totally alienated from our society? I think there is a matter to be discussed here. There is a serious issue of historical injustice heaped upon these communities, and their history or their tradition or their experiences as slaves in their own lands is not properly understood and not properly taken into account when we were formulating our policies for our land reforms and other matters. At least at this point of time, now that Kerala is going into a state of development, social development, which is unprecedented. It's at this point, it is necessary for us to take a very critical look, take a self-critical look also of how and to what extent we have been able to address this very deep-rooted historical injustices heaped upon the lower caste or scheduled caste communities who were nothing more than slaves. They were treated as slaves, and they were even commercial. They were treated as even commercial property at one point of time, and that matter needs to be properly addressed and discussed in our academic forums as well as policy making forums, so that this major issue of an injustice, which is still to be corrected, comes into public attention, even at least at this point of time. I'm thankful to KCHR for bringing this issue once again back into public attention, because my paper on Baber's life and experiences was published 15 years ago. In 2011, when I saw this 200th second centenary of these developments were taking place, it was published as a paper in some English publication, but generally didn't get much attention. But now, thanks to Dr. K.N. Ganesh, who has read the paper and took a very keen interest in this topic. He has invited me to this discussion, and I'm thankful to him, especially for giving me a chance to present my views at this August forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we'll wait for a few minutes. KNG has told he might join. So over to you, Director. Would you like to say something?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chekuti, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure that all enjoyed your presentation. And it's actually interesting in the sense that you were bringing into limelight the documents covering 3 decades, wherein Baber largely involved in producing discussion on the creation of new slavery in North Malabar. And you have also picked up the important point that even though earlier the colonial government were in favor of Baber's argument, later they withdrew from their position due to the larger interest of capital. In that sense, you are arguing that colonialism was complicit in creating modern slavery in Malabar. That's a wonderful argument, and we all enjoyed it. And you extended your argument, saying that we need to understand the issues related to the slavery while framing policies for the downtrodden people in the contemporary age. That is also well taken. And thank you very much. And while listening to your lecture, I was actually it's my own interest as well. I was thinking of a novel written by Iranjiyam Devi. I don't know whether you know about him, or whether you have read his novel. There is a novel called Wayanattu Kulavan. This is a novel written by Iranjiyam Devi. I'm not saying that that's a wonderful novel and one should read that. But actually, that novel was written depending upon the documents which we were talking about. The entire novel is actually constructed out of the documents created and the first 3-4 decades of the colonial era in North Malabar, where he is talking about how certain children were captured and brought into the Anjarakandi plantation, and how they were employed as slaves there, and the subsequent issues of court cases, and what all the later people did to liberate these slaves and things like that. So I'm just mentioned that there is a novel like that, and that may be maybe an interest for you as well. I didn't see much people read that novel because people might have got confused over the title of the novel. And even the title, not only the title, even the cover of the novel was actually a Theyyam, which is performed in North Malabar. So actually, that novel is not related to Theyyam, rather it is related to the slavery and the documents which we are talking about. He is also bringing about the issue we were talking about, like why we should why we should understand the creation of the new slavery in the colonial period, and how far it is interested, how far understanding of that process is important, and in the policy making that we need in the contemporary period. So there is something like that. That's I just mentioned that. But since it is a very interesting issue, I would like to make one or two comments which you can pick up, and if you want, you can also address. One is related to the idea which you were talking about. You said that it is colonialism was complicit in creating the new slavery. That's fine. That is well taken. And you were trying to say that this must be taken while considering, while framing policies for the once aggressive slavery in the contemporary period. And your criticism against Land Reform Act came from that point of view. But we know that this kind of slavery was not only the colonial product; it has a very long history. Yeah, the slavery of this kind had a pre-colonial history as well. So when we are focusing merely on the colonial period and colonialism, we are actually erasing a longer history of slavery. And without even referring to that longer history of slavery, how can we understand the contemporary Dalit histories, their argument for egalitarian equality and things like that. So I would say that colonialism is very important. At the same time, there are pre-colonial practices that too should be considered while discussing such matter. This is one thing which I wanted to say. Secondly, there are things while discussing the Baber and the debate created by Baber, what you have missed, I feel, is that there is changes happening in the agrarian practice. You mentioned that there are agrarian, there is changes happening in the agrarian practice. And even when changing the agrarian practice, somebody wanted to continue with the feudal practice. That is why slavery is produced, or slavery is supported by colonial administrators and so on. So, but meanwhile, you haven't addressed the question of colonialism, neither colonialism nor capitalism. So we know that if we are looking at the Atlantic slavery as well as the colonial practices, both these colonialism as a mode of production as well as capitalism as a mode of production actually demanded similar kind of labor. So without addressing such issues, how can we proceed with the discussion on slavery? So what is importance of understanding colonialism and colonial demand for labor, colonial demand for labor? At the same time, colonial capitalist agriculture practice, which is emerging in the early 19th century in Malabar. They too need some kind of this kind of labor, and there are, if we are looking at the history of Atlantic slavery, you can see the similar things happening there as well. So without addressing the issue of colonialism and without addressing the issues of capitalism, how could we proceed with the discussion on slavery? That is also another thing which I would like to have a comment from your side. And thank you very much. It's a very interesting theme, and you have presented it very well. And we're very thankful to you. And this is only my comments. There will be more comments and questions from others, and I invite comments and questions from other participants as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So would you like to respond? Hello, can you hear me? You are muted. Yeah.
I think I will respond to at the end, because there may be others also.
Okay.
So that will be a better way of saving our time. Okay.
Fine. So we have Professor Ganesh has joined. So can you hear me, Professor Ganesh?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead. Yeah.
No, unfortunately I could not listen to what Chekuti was saying in this present lecture. Instead of that, I am just basing upon myself upon what I read in his book. Hello?
Please continue.
Yeah. What I read in his book, that is the only thing which I can really respond to now.
Okay.
See, I think there are two things. One is the point that the nation was making just now. I perfectly agree with Chekuti when he says that colonialism is complicit in actually making the modern slavery. That is, I think, a point that has been well discussed among the historians of the modern times, where they think that the modern slavery is something that is of a colonial institution. There I got my disagreements also with Dinesh when he says that slavery existed before. But there is no question about slavery not existing before. There have always been slavery during the medieval times and ancient times. All the periods in history there have been slavery. But the point is that slavery in modern times is something that is very curious in two ways. One is that that is where, you see, this whole question of mode of production comes in, I think. The mode of production comes in primarily because of the fact that the colonialists were trying to make use of the conditions which they found themselves in colonies, and trying to make labor that could be suited to this particular conditions. And this is something which has been discussed very much in West Indies kind of a situation. But Chekuti himself has mentioned some of these ideas later in his other articles, in which there is this question of West Indies where, there has been export of labor from various parts of the world to West Indies, so that there is a kind of an economy that was being built in West Indies, which basically suited the interests of the colonial masters. That is something which is very interesting. But now what I found was another thing which I am just drawing your attention. I don't know whether Chekuti has actually looked at it and whether he has found evidence for such a thing, which is the point which I found it in some of the discussions on slavery from Africa. where, for example, the colonialists, when they were recruiting, of course, Africa was the biggest haven of slave trade all over the world. And there were, according to one estimate, there were about 14 million slaves who were actually being brought from Africa to America, so that that provided the basis for the American growth later on. Now, if this 14 million, we don't know whether it is correct or not, whether this 14 million is correct. Some people say that it's not only 14 million, it is more than 50 million. Anyway, that is a different issue. But the point which I'm trying to raise is another question altogether. These people who are actually being bought were not bought because they were Negroes, or whether they were colored people or inferior people or such things like that. But instead of that, appears that they were actually being brought because of their skill in doing certain things. The two things which, in fact, which was very interesting to me was, one is this place called Gold Coast, which was called Ghana later. And there, you see, the people who were being bought were actually people who were proficient in gold cutting. The people who are proficient in gold cutting, there were a number of people who were actually proficient in gold cutting and sieving of gold. That is, ponnarippu it is called in Malayalam. The sieving of gold, or ponnarippu, and gold cutting. And these people were actually the people who were actually being brought. Do we find such evidence from Kerala that people who are actually being enslaved in Kerala belong to either communities or craft groups who actually were proficient in doing something of similar kind of things? If that is so, then there is a clear case of enslavement of a population which is actually skilled population, where they wanted the skilled population to be enslaved so that they don't have to pay any wages for them at all. This is a point which is, I think, which is interesting to me, which is, I think, I hope Chekuti will throw some light upon, because this is something which I don't know much about, and I've not found any direct evidence for myself on this issue. And if that is true, then it is a very interesting point of departure from the normal discussions of slavery. That's what I think. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah. So, sir, could you please respond to it? So we don't have much questions in the chat box, so you can
Okay,
respond.
thank you. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Dineshan and Dr. Ganesh for the kind of very informed comments on my article, as well as the present presentation. I thank both of them. But I think, the issue is, especially Dr. Dineshan was referring to two major issues. One is the Dalit history. That it's a pre-colonial practice. My point is that we have to actually look at the historical data available before us. It is true that slavery, especially slavery connected with the agricultural practices, has been something that we have been experiencing from the feudal period, when cultivation, the landed system was evident in Kerala. But the point that I was making is that in this particular period, we have very clear historical documentation evidence that slavery was practiced, and not only it was being practiced, it was being converted into a commercial activity. So there is a very clear distinction about it. When we accept that there was slavery of certain systems, we also have to accept that these slaves, or people who are attached to these agricultural properties, they had their own rights also. If you look at the caste system, or the caste system in Kerala, you will see that even the lowest sections of society did have some kind of social relevance and social contributions and social rights also. But that right, that right that they had in the system, or as a system of production, that was being taken away by the colonial administration. That is something which we have to address. We have to actually identify, and we have to take into account. That's one point I have to. Then secondly, agricultural practices. Agricultural practices have definitely changed. Luckily, in fact, the commissioners, law commissioners have said that if we allow this system of plantations in Malabar, if we the system of plantation system becomes really widespread, we will see the same situation that is happening in West Indies, in this eastern parts of our colonies also. So luckily, actually, we don't have much of an evidence that there was a widespread practice of slavery in our plantations. I don't think it was there because there is not much. Anyway, I haven't seen any real documentation that slavery was practiced in our plantations in Wayanad or any other parts, because these plantations were a phenomenon in the later part of 19th century. So maybe that is one reason where we don't have the widespread practice of slavery in our plantations. And then the question is, of course, plantation economy demanded this kind of labor, no doubt about it. That is why we had this Girimitia community, the agreement people. Amitav Ghosh and others have written in very detail about that kind of community and their travels, experiences in other parts of the world. But lucky, in Malabar, at least, we don't have much of an evidence of that kind of labor practice, that slavery being practiced in that in open manner. So I think that two issues we need to discuss and debate much more. And I also agree that this is a gray area, really. As Ganeshan has pointed out, there is much work we have to do about the kind of slavery being practiced. I mean, the kind of practices actually that we have been experiencing. We need to go into the detail. But in my experience, because I have been working on this society, in the colonial society in Malabar in the last, that is 19th century, for a long time. And my experience is that these issues are not deeply discussed or deeply understood in the academic circles. So we hope that maybe, possibly, these issues will get much more attention. About the issue of the proficiency in special skills, one thing we can see is that the only plantation that we see with some records is Anjarikandi plantation, where mainly the people who were employed were people from the lowest sections, as Cherumas, Puliyas, and others. A few, other upper caste people were also there. They were also there, but generally speaking, the lowest sections of the society were employed, and they claim that we are, making proper arrangements for their education, their social upliftment, this and that. We had to actually look at the contribution of colonial administration or European, other European evangelization project also in bringing up our society to a better level. That's a matter which we need to discuss. But my basic argument is that when we are looking at the policy making, we have to really seriously look into the issue of Dalit communities, the experiences, the historical experience they have had, and the total deprivation that they were experiencing for a long time. That has never been seriously taken into account in our policy making in the independent after independence. And that is why this community appears to be still rather alienated from our social mainstream, rather still remaining a community of a deprived community in our society, and that needs a little more attention because we are in a position now to actually look at the historical experiences. Even Western world, a large number of families are now actually telling. Even last, only recently, a BBC reporter, she went to the Caribbeans. She actually met with the families who were slaves of her ancestors and made amends. So we have to think about making that kind of amends for the historical the injustices that has happened, and that is only right in a society which is seeking to move forward to an egalitarian and more progressive and more democratic and more humane society. I'm extremely thankful to all the comments here, and I am sure that these discussions will continue among the younger generation of scholars, because this is an issue which needs to be much more seriously debated by our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, Professor Ganesh, would you like to add something, or you can unmute? Would you please unmute? Okay. Can you hear me, Professor Ganesh?
Now it is okay.
Yeah. So would you like to add something?
Nothing more. I think I perfectly agree with Sekuti when he talked about the actual need for actually understanding in detail, in depth, the privation as well as the destitution of the Dalit communities in India, and why there should be, as he said, why the society as a whole should make amends to them. I only wanted to add only one thing to that, which is simply that, you see, one should not take the Dalit communities as one amorphous mass, which they are not. In fact, there is enough evidence that's what I was pointing out. There was enough evidence that they were actually skilled in the survival as well as making things, and it is precisely the skills which actually made them what you call the colonial masters are actually trying to make use of their skills only. That's the only thing which I was trying to point out, and it is quite possible that we will try to further research and historical studies will make us reveal the type of skills as well as abilities that the Dalit communities as a whole has played in history. And that is something which you have to undertake. And I'm thankful to Sekuti for opening up this particular debate. And I'm sure that we'll continue the debate with further interventions by other scholars also. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, NP Chekuti. I'm so grateful to you that you actually accepted our invitation and delivered your lecture. So, and congratulations on your new book. It sounds really interesting. I have started reading it by bit and parts. And the third chapter really seems to be interesting for me, where you were talking about bridging gaps in the cultural, like through war songs and Nercha Patugal, which was quite interesting to me because I come from a performance studies background as well. So I'll read in detail and I'll get back to you soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you everyone for joining today. So we'll be announcing the next webinar soon, and KCHR is going to organize few interesting events in the next few months. So we'll be inviting you soon for these events. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you.